Welcome to our lecture on fashion from the 1960s. And this is where you're going to see the emergence of style tribes, which we will talk about during this lecture, where you see groups, distinctive groups wearing distinctive style of clothing and having this particular lifestyle. So the 60s, it's very important to know that the next, 30 years was really a lot of political upheaval, a lot of discourse, a lot of unrest in the U.S. I know I'm feeling it now, but definitely had a large amount back then. So just so you can get an idea, this goes through kind of what's major points in the history. So one is the oral contraceptive pill is developed in 1960 by the FDA. In 61, Berlin Wall was erected, and freedom riders begin in the American South. Russia puts the first man in space, and it starts that contest between U.S. and Russia for their space program. And Alan Shepard makes the suborbital space flight in May of that year. Cuban Missile Crisis in 62, very influential book, The Silent Spring, comes out in 62. In 63, the huge civil rights rally in Washington, D.C., assassination of President Kennedy, the publishing of The Feminine Mystique, which is like the groundwork for the feminist movement. In 64, Congress passes Civil Rights Bill. Martin Luther King wins the Nobel Peace Prize in 64. In 66, National Organization for Women, which is founded so right a little over the midpoint of the 60s. In 67, demonstrations against the Vietnam War, and this got very heated in the U.S. A little over 10,000 young people participated in the Bien demonstration in Central Park, so that was huge. 68, unfortunately, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and Robert Kennedy was assassinated. There were student demonstrations in Europe and the U.S., and these started, in large numbers. In 69, Apollo 11 lands on the moon. We had the Woodstock Festival in 69. In 70, we had the 4 students that were killed in the anti-war demonstration at Kent State. And first celebration of Earth Day was in 1970. In 71, 200,000 participated in the anti-war march in Washington, D.C. 72, Nixon goes to China, and you had break-in at Watergate. 73, you had the peace treaty ending Vietnam War signed. U.S. Supreme Court rules that abortion is legal. And Yom Kippur and the Arab-Israeli War, which conflict is still going on. And you had the oil embargoes. Richard Nixon's resignation. Ford becomes president in 74. Diplomatic relations started opening up between U.S. and China, which is now a very heated situation right now. 79, Camp David agreement between Egypt and Israel, and the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant failure occurs. That's why people are so scared of using nuclear energy. So in terms of lifestyle and looks, so in the fashion arena by 1960, a change was evident, is that we're moving away from the new look. So again, the new look is sloping shoulders, very tiny waist, corset, full hips, big skirt. So it was a kind of a backlash to that. We have a boxier look, not a defined waist. Instead of the long skirt, we definitely went shorter. Now, unlike before, when hems have gone up out of necessity or because of rationing, this time it really was to show some leg, to show some skin. So the hems start getting shorter, and you have a more boxier, that's why the shift dresses, you have a boxier look. Now, early 60s is simplistic, so simpler times. And the designers that kind of stand out, they actually were trained under designers that were big in the 50s, like Saint Laurent, Cardin, Ungaro. So they kind of led the couture movement, again, the high fashion. Now, what's interesting is, yes, high fashion is flourishing, but also new designers come in and they expand and really kind of push the pret-a-porter, which is French for ready-to-wear. And the RTW, the ready-to-wear market, is really big. It's flourishing in the U.S. in the 60s, and that never really stopped. But we still have high fashion, but all of them have their lower-priced, RTW or pret-a-porter lines. That's where they make their money. In case you didn't know, designers don't make any money off their couture. They don't. That's why they have licensing like fragrances, perfumes, sunglasses, and all these diffusion lines. That's where they make their money. That's how they pay their rent. Their couture really is just, for publicity. So this is flourishing in the 60s. This is becoming really popular. And what's interesting is what you see, in particular in the ready-to-wear, the pret-a-porter, is how these social protests are having an impact on fashion, because they are. So things like the civil rights movement, the Black Power movement. So the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement had influence on fashion. They had a distinctive look. And you start seeing in kind of the coats, the jackets, the sunglasses, and kind of that overall look that was achieved. And just really big is anti-war, anti-establishment. This is like the big thing for the 60s. That's the big theme, is rebellion and against the establishment. Remember, the 50s was conformity. We dress the same as a family. It's all about the family, about the group. This is the opposite. This is anti-war, anti-establishment, conformity. It's do your different things, do things differently. That was the prevailing kind of lifestyle. The feminist movement was really big. I know we have the Women's March now, but it was huge back then. I mean, huge for equal rights. So the feminist movement really had a lot of turnout back then. Street styles really started, that come from the youth. Again, the focus really starts shifting to the youth, and that's where the focus is, the youth. And what's interesting, they really start congregating. They start like these areas where youth kind of get together. And this is where you start seeing kind of street style. People started paying attention to what young people were putting together, the kind of outfits they were putting together, and really focusing on, hey, what are they doing? And things like, they would literally like refashion. They'd get safety pins, they'd have rips in their jeans or their pants, and they would, start using like the safety pins, and they started doing kind of different things that their peers, their friends, started copying one another. So they were wearing the kind of similar kind of clothing. So they started developing what we call style tribes. Particular groups like mod, hippies, anti-war youth. They have a particular look, and they all dress similarly. They had kind of similar interests. Punk. The punk look, a lot of people attribute this look to the 80s. It started in the 60s. So you had the modern kind of futuristic look. You had those that were really hippie, bohemian, anti-war youth, the punk rockers. And I gave you a link so you can take a look at this video on mid-60s versus late 60s. So you can take a look at that video. And what's interesting, I love this picture because she's like, what are you wearing? Why is that skirt so short? This time you start seeing those hemlines really start going up. And one of the looks that really were prevailing was this futuristic modern look, mod look, and very, very big on the space exploration, and futuristic was really a popular prevailing theme. We start seeing patent leather, bold contrasting colors. You start seeing these kind of interesting things that they did for marketing. So like, covering the faces to, something like this to, make it more editorial was very interesting. Some bold contrast in prints. So like op art, so art movement that kind of really influences fashion here is the op art and pop art, so optical art. So like Andy Warhol's Campbell soup dress, paper dress was really popular. So using, pop art was really popular. It comes and goes in fashion today, but it really originated from the 60s. Fiber artists really started working on making wearable art. Going braless was really huge. There was like the soft no bra, which was basically just the elastic, the straps, and that was it. So going braless was really popular in the 60s. The first nylon pantyhose. We've had hosiery, but the first nylon was around the 60s. And it hasn't changed from that we use nylon as the primary fiber. Other undergarments, body stocking, bodysuits were originating in the 60s. They became really popular. In terms of silhouettes, Empire waistline around the 60s became really popular. Again, from the Empire period, it was influenced by that. A-line shapes. Now, A-line means narrow on the top and wider on the bottom, so it creates like an A. So for tops, for dresses, very popular. So it flares slightly from neck to hem, not like a tent, but just, a slight flare. Straight from the yoke. So this is a yoke right here. So dresses that literally had a straight seam. See this? Just like straight, so shapeless. Again, the opposite of the new look. Unfitted through the torso with a flounce at the knee, like a ruffle at the knee right there, flirty little thing. Became popular as well. So some popular designers, Saint Laurent in 66, Gernrich in 68. Now, one thing that you have to see that was scandalous was these kind of cutouts for the swimwear and showing, bare chest under sheer clothing, which was used in magazines. Today, we are used to that. We don't even, we're like, yeah, we've seen a million times. This was scandalous in the 60s because you didn't see it before. Evening dresses were short and very ornamented. So you'd have like a lot of sequins or, embellishment, but they were short. Evening dresses were not long in the 60s typically. Sportswear keeps getting stronger and stronger. Again, that trend of getting more casual. Pants are being used more by women. And hip huggers were really popular, and hot pants, really short pants, so taking the trend from the skirts. The influence of fashion designers started going down. And the influence from young people and people from the streets started going up. And events like, and bands like the Beatles, events like Woodstock, concerts that started really influencing and shaping fashion. And individual people like Jacqueline Kennedy, First Lady, she was like literally a fashion icon, still is, obviously. She popularized the Chanel suit and the pillbox hat, became extremely popular because of her. Many young men started wearing, now going into menswear, colorful fabrics and jewelry, started using more jewelry. Multicolored stripes, check shirts were really starting to become popular in business suits. Jacket lapels started getting wider and pants were flared or getting bell bottoms. So most people think bell bottoms in the 70s. It started in the 60s. Men grew long sideburns, mustaches, or beards to go with their longer hair length. Blue jeans became really popular. They became like the staple item. And in the 60s, you would see like denim everything. Overalls, vests, shirt, pants, patchwork. Denim, 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 and more denim on top of more denim. Andre Courage became a really popular designer and going into that futuristic mod look. So doing some A-line shapes, again, shift dresses, straight, no defined waist, as you can see here. Very futuristic. A lot of piping, contrast piping. Double-breasted was really popular. Using buttons and novelty glasses. White boots were really popular in the 60s. And interesting seaming details is also really popular in the 60s. And using bold contrast with like oranges, browns, yellow, a lot of contrast with white became really popular. A lot of like contrast piping and bias tape. Scallops were popular, and color blocking, very popular. So we credit the 60s to the popularity of color blocking. Okay, so this concludes part 1 of our look from the 60s. We will continue with part 2.